Today we're going to talk about templates. I've been using a ton of templates in my recent builds, and I plan to continue using them because they make my life easier. So I decided to make an in-depth video on how I use them and the methods that you can use to get the same results. But first, all right, that's better. Just like templates make my life easier with woodworking, this week's sponsor Trade makes it easier for you to get your morning cup of coffee from the nation's top roasters delivered right to your door. Here's how it works. Go to Trade's website and take the quiz. Based on your preferences, they'll curate matches tailored to your taste. Once the perfect coffee has been found, you can choose how often fresh coffee will appear at your door. And you can rate each coffee you get, so Trade can keep sending you the coffee that you love. So, funny story, when my mailman actually handed me the Trade coffee bag, he was like, wow, that coffee really smells delicious. I was like, yeah, I know, I can't wait to try it. So I tried it and it's delicious. And I hope you guys check it out. If you click the link down below, you can get 30% off your first bag and the shipping is free. So thank you to Trade for sponsoring this video. Now that I have my coffee, let's get back to talking templates. So why use templates at all? It makes total sense if you're repeating the same shape over and over again, like with the leg pieces for the curved storage bench that I made. I made 16 of these, so it just made total sense to make a template so I can easily repeat the same shape. But what if there's a project where you're just making one shape, like when I made this guitar? I wasn't batching out guitars, it was just one guitar that I was making. So why would I use a template for just one project? I can answer that question with another question. Would you rather sand 1/4" MDF or end grain on 8/4 ash? Of course, you don't need to use templates to make really cool woodworking projects, but I think that they improve your workflow, increase your productivity, and the overall product is just a higher quality product in the end. So I just highly recommend using templates. So let's say I need to just draw this random curved shape for a project. I could easily just cut this on the jigsaw or the bandsaw and then clean it up with the sander and the job would be done. But then back to that question that I asked earlier on in the video, what would you rather sand? Hardwood or 1/4" MDF? So I would much rather sand and shape a piece of MDF than a piece of hardwood. So that's what I like to use for my templates. I like to use 1/4" MDF. But as you can see what I have going on here, sometimes I just use whatever I have on hand. So the guitar was 3/4" MDF and this solitaire game was 1/4" plywood. So just use what you got. But normally I do prefer to use 1/4" MDF because it's really inexpensive and it works really well. I drew the random shape out onto the MDF and I could now cut it out with a jigsaw or a bandsaw. I just got a new bandsaw, so I'm gonna use that. I'll cut as close to the line as I could possibly get without going over, and then I just quickly clean it up on a sander, getting up to those lines and getting it to final shape. And now I have a curved shaped object that I'm going to want to cut into this piece of wood. It's a weird shape, but just try to bear with me and imagine what you could possibly use this for with real woodworking projects. So you have two options here. You can either double side tape it to your workpiece right now, do all the rough cutting and everything while the template is still attached. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that and you don't feel confident in your jigsaw or bandsaw skills, you can just temporarily put this on like this now, trace it out with a pencil and then remove it, rough cut it, and then attach it with the double-sided tape so that you can take it to your router. I'm going to use the double-sided tape now to attach it before I rough cut it. But before I do that, every single time that I use double-sided tape in a video, someone says, hey, have you ever tried the planer's tape and CA glue trick? I have, and I actually really don't like that method, and here's why. Let's say I want to use this template on a piece of maple. So, in order to use the blue tape and CA glue method, I have to align the two pieces up really, really well, or else I'm going to get CA glue all over my pieces. So here, let me show you. These two pieces have to line up like exactly in order for these pieces to come out clean without any CA glue on them. Now, on purpose, I'm going to offset it and miss the alignment just to show you what would happen. All right, it's stuck on there, which is great. That's what you want. But look what happens. Because these two pieces were not lined up, there's now CA glue on my maple. There's CA glue also on the template. The workpiece is a mess. I just really don't like this. Now, it's a different story when you have smaller pieces that are as thick as the tape, or if you cover the entire piece with painter's tape, then you wouldn't have that problem. The pieces would never be misaligned and it would be fine. But when I'm using templates in my builds, they're usually larger pieces for larger parts of furniture projects. So I'm just really not a fan of the method. And let me show you a trick that I do to help with the double-sided tape to make it go really, really fast. All right, so my double-sided tape. I always leave a tail from the backing left over on the roll. And that makes it really easy to apply because I just need to pull the tape, press it down on the piece, lift up the tape by the tail of the backing, and now rip away at the tape, leaving the tail of the backing. Now I'll just rip that when it gets super long, and my next pieces are going to be easy to install again because of the backing left over, the tail left over. Now we'll just cut away at all the excess on the bandsaw while the template is attached. But once again, you can just do this with the pencil line if you don't feel confident doing that. You can also cut it out with the jigsaw. That's what I've been doing up until I got this guy. So now all there is to do is to clean up all those rough bandsaw or jigsaw cuts with a router. There are a couple different bits that you can use to do this. This bit here is a template bit or a pattern bit. See, this bearing over here is in between the shank and the cutters. The bearing rides along the template, and like magic, the cutters cut along the wood, and it creates a duplicate piece that matches your template. I loved using these until I had a few situations where I had tear out on the curved project. Because their grain runs in all different directions when you have a curve, so like you're going downhill and then you're going uphill, these straight cutters on these bits, they catch on that wood and it tears out and the piece goes flying, and it's a really bad experience. So I have since upgraded to these monster ultimate flush trim bits, and these are insane. So if you look closely at this bit, you can see spirals running in different directions, and that's what helps prevent the tear out. I should also mention that the diameter of the bit actually matters because you want to be able to fit into the curves that you're routing. So for this sample piece, this big bit is going to fit into this curve. But let's say for something like this, this is a pretty tight radius in the corner over here. This monster bit would not fit into that corner there. Neither would this one. I would need a smaller radius flush trim bit to get into these corners over here. I put the flush trim bit in my router table, but you can use a handheld router as well. Oh, it helps to plug it in. So see how their grain was going in a bunch of different directions here, and there's absolutely zero tear out because of that awesome bit. So this is how I remove the templates. I use a putty knife, just kind of pry it under and lift up. So this double-sided tape that I use is super strong, really thin, and it also peels away really easily, and there is zero residue left over on the piece. I will link to this down below. Definitely better than using the painter's tape and CA glue in my humble opinion. These flush trim bits are awesome, and I use this method on a ton of my projects and it works out great. But there's another method that I really like, and that's using a guide bushing in my router. So this could get a little bit more complicated, but once you fully understand it, it's actually quite simple. So what is a guide bushing? It's basically an insert that you put on the underside of the base plate of your router that could turn any bit into a pattern bit. The confusing thing here is that the outer diameter of this bushing is not the same size as the diameter of the bit that you're using. Unlike with these pattern bits, the bearing is in line with the cutters. So whatever size pattern you make, that's exactly what size workpiece is going to be cut. So when you're using a guide bushing, you have to offset the size of your pattern based on the difference in the outer diameter of the bushing and your router bit. You can take the outer diameter measurement of the bushing and then subtract the diameter of the bit that you're using, then divide that in half to find the offset that you need. Or once you've chosen your bit and your bearing size, you can put it in the router, use some double-sided tape to temporarily put a template onto a piece of scrap wood, and then just run the router along that template. And now I just need to measure that little lip that's in between the template and the cut that I just made. That is 1/8. So because I'm going to be routing around the perimeter of a project, I need to make my template 1/8 smaller than what I actually need. If I was going to be making a pocket on the inside of a project, I would need to make the opening 1/8 bigger than what I actually need. Also, if you're going to be routing out a pocket into something, it's easier to clamp that down because you have an outer perimeter, an outer edge to clamp against. So what I'll do here is I will clamp a scrap board onto my work table, double side tape the workpiece down to that scrap, and then double side tape the template onto there. And just to note, I'm not changing the size of this template like I would in a real project, just to show you the size difference of what this is going to end up looking like if I use the guide bushing compared to the pattern bit that I used before. I'll just keep plunging the router down little by little, and I'll follow around the template until I get down to the bottom. So I added this piece over here just to help the router from wobbling. Usually when I'm doing this on bigger furniture pieces, I have more surface area. Didn't think of that with a small piece, but that's just something to note. Comes off. You can see that the second one that I cut with the guide bushing is slightly larger than the one that I cut with the flush trim bit. And that's because of the difference between the outer diameter of the bushing and the size of the bit. So it could be a little bit confusing to figure out the difference and to figure out how much you need to offset your template. But once you get used to it, I actually prefer using the guide bushing method because it eliminates that first step of doing that rough cut with a jigsaw or a bandsaw. Even if you're working with material that's really thick where you wouldn't be able to plunge all the way through, just making that first initial perfect shape with the guide bushing and the template would be a lot easier because first you're just creating that perfect shape just a little bit, like maybe like up to there, and then you have to rough cut the rest at the jigsaw or bandsaw, and it's going to be easier because you have less material to remove. And then you have to clean up the rest of that with a flush trim bit at the router table or router, and that will also be easier than having to flush trim the whole thickness of the piece. So a lot of different methods to get the same end result. Something that I did not touch on this video was climb cutting. I didn't talk about climb cutting because ever since I got these awesome bits, grain direction has not been an issue for me. So what climb cutting is that you actually run your router or your workpiece on the router table in the opposite direction than what you should be cutting it. So the reason why you would do this is to account for grain direction. It's a little bit dangerous to do, and you have to make sure that everything is clamped really well and you're using really good push blocks, but sometimes it is necessary to go backwards. So this is a case where you would go backwards or climb cut. So you can see the grain is running in that direction. I marked it out, and normally you move your router bit like that. So this grain is running in the same direction as the bit is moving and spinning. You're good to go there. Nothing is going to tear out. But if you flip the piece over, see the grain is running like that, this cutter is going to catch underneath there because that's where the grain is, and this will catch on it and pull it, and this whole chunk will tear out. So that's where you would want to do a climb cut and go backwards, or they make pattern bits and flush trim bits. One has a bearing on the top, one has a bearing on the bottom. And the reason for that is so that you can flip your workpieces over on the other side to account for the different grain direction. So just be really careful about grain direction when you're using straight bits. If you want to see a situation where I had tear out and then had to fix it with a climb cut, check out my 3-string cigar box guitar video that I will link in the description so you can see what actually happened and how I fixed it. So you definitely don't need templates to make these shapes and to make cool projects, but just try it on your next project and I promise you, you're going to be hooked. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to WOODCRAFT and Trade for sponsoring this video. The sun finally came out. Sorry about all the thunder noise in this one. I will see you on the next project.